Thrift stores aren't just for stained khakis and smelling like somebody's attic. They are dumping grounds for the absolute most unhinged, cursed, and baffling objects Americans have ever legally owned. Forget antique roadshow. We're talking human teeth, mafia sock puppets, and deeply disturbing DIY projects. Here are 50 thrift store finds that will make you question everyone. 1. Normally, a hand-painted wooden sign at a thrift store offers some aggressively basic wisdom like live, laugh, love. But one shopper discovered a beautifully crafted board with a genuinely unhinged demand. In neat, serious lettering, it simply ordered, "Do not alarm the cheese." I have so many questions. What exact behavior frightens a block of cheddar? Does startled Gouda taste worse? Does the brie call the cops? We have zero context for this dairy-related threat. Honestly, I would hang it right above my fridge just to keep all my dinner guests in a constant state of mild, confused panic. 2. Bringing home a handcrafted wooden birdhouse seems like a wholesome weekend activity. You check inside the little circular entrance, expecting maybe a few spiderwebs to clear out. Instead, you find yourself locked in an intense staring contest. Wedged perfectly into the back wall was a single, highly realistic prosthetic glass eye. It was just sitting in the dark, watching the entrance. Who goes out of their way to build a quaint little home for finches, only to turn it into a tiny surveillance state for a cyclops? Whoever bought this absolutely left it right out by the dumpster. 3. Sometimes the universe aligns to bless us with pure, unadulterated garbage that simultaneously belongs in the Louvre. Someone actually stumbled upon a 3-foot-tall statue of a pigeon. But this was no ordinary park rat. This majestic bird was wearing a tiny, perfectly tailored cowboy hat and a little western vest. It was not a valuable antique. A human being simply woke up one day, looked at a pigeon, and decided it needed a rugged frontier aesthetic. If you find a cowboy bird for under $20, it is your patriotic duty to buy it immediately. 4. We all harbor that secret fantasy of finding a priceless treasure buried under stained t-shirts and broken toasters. A guy in Virginia actually pulled it off, buying a weird swirly glass vase for $32 just because it looked neat. For 2 whole years, this man used the vase to hold his cheap ballpoint pens. Then an art expert saw it and practically needed a defibrillator. It was a lost masterpiece by the legendary Italian architect Carlo Scarpa. That glorified pen holder eventually sold at auction for over $107,000. Not a bad return on investment. 5. Popping the latches on a $5 vintage suitcase usually reveals some mothballs or a forgotten pair of socks. But one shopper cracked an old case open and uncovered someone's absolute descent into madness. The luggage was packed with dozens of incredibly detailed, hand-drawn maps of cities that completely do not exist. We are talking named streets, residential zoning districts, public parks, and intricate river systems. Someone spent thousands of hours meticulously planning a metropolis that only existed in their brain. It feels highly illegal to just casually buy the blueprints to an alternate dimension for the price of a cheeseburger. 6. You can find a lot of depressing items in the clearance bins, but one shopper located the saddest novelty product ever manufactured. It was an old, sealed tin with a vintage label boldly claiming to contain genuine canned laughter. You actually had to work for your fake joy with a metal can opener. A tiny note taped to the side issued a warning. Contains authentic vintage laughter from a 1970s sitcom audience. May cause feelings of nostalgia and mild disappointment. You really have to wonder what kind of desperate situation prompts a person to crack open dead people laughing. 7. If you assumed the children's toy section was completely innocent, you have never encountered organized crime made of cotton blends. Someone uncovered an entire sock puppet mafia family carefully arranged inside a cardboard box. These were not your average kindergarten crafts. They wore tiny, custom-tailored pinstripe suits and miniature fedoras. They even had little name tags identifying them as Don Socchioni and Frankie the Foot. They were positioned in a circle like they were discussing a highly illegal hit on the dryer that kept eating their associates. The sheer psychotic dedication required to sow a criminal underworld is truly terrifying. 8. Buying outdated electronics is always a massive gamble, but occasionally you hit the absolute jackpot of unresolved drama. A shopper picked up an answering machine from the 90s that still had the mini cassette tape lodged inside. Upon hitting play, they were treated to a series of increasingly aggressive voicemails from a woman screaming at a man named Barnaby. Her main grievance? She furiously demanded to know what he was going to do about the emu situation. Did Barnaby steal a giant Australian bird? Was he running an illegal farm? We will never know, but I am firmly on Team Emu. 9. The pet aisle is usually full of questionable chew toys, but one person found a conceptual masterpiece of pure retail fraud. It was a brand new, factory-sealed package containing an invisible dog leash. The product was literally just a red plastic handle attached to absolutely nothing. The cardboard backing proudly guaranteed a no-tangle, no-mess walk every single time. And honestly, their legal team was brilliant, because they absolutely delivered on that promise. Some absolute con artist managed to sell empty air wrapped in plastic, and some poor fool actually spent their hard-earned money on it. 10. Have you ever wondered what local police departments do when their evidence locker gets completely full? Apparently, they just dropped their deeply traumatizing cargo off at the local Goodwill. A guy bought a vintage film projector, took it home, and realized a thick reel of film was still threaded inside. He fired it up, hoping for an old cartoon or a boring family vacation. Instead, he was greeted by the raw, unedited police interrogation footage of a highly notorious serial killer from the 1970s. Talk about a massive, unexpected mood killer for your Friday family movie night. 11. We have all seen that incredibly tacky velvet painting of dogs playing poker hanging in a dive bar somewhere. Well, some absolute lunatic decided that two-dimensional art was not quite enough and created the taxidermied squirrel version. A shopper found 5 real stuffed squirrels seated around a tiny wooden table. They were wearing little green visors, smoking cigar stubs, and aggressively betting with a pile of acorns in the middle. One of the deceased rodents was even hiding an ace up its furry sleeve. It is exactly the kind of decor you want if you actively hate having house guests over. 12. Checking the pockets of used clothing is usually a fantastic way to find a used tissue or a crusty penny. But a couple in North Carolina bought a 58-cent sweater and pulled out a small laminated piece of paper. It looked like absolute scribbles, but it turned out to be a detailed playbook diagram hand-drawn by Vince Lombardi, the legendary head coach of the Green Bay Packers. That slightly smelly 58-cent sweater held a legitimate piece of sports history that later sold at auction for over $43,000. I am officially checking the pockets of every garment I see. 13. Therapy is incredibly expensive, and actual emotional support animals require expensive food and daily walks. Clearly, someone invented a much cheaper alternative and then abandoned it at a charity shop. A shopper stumbled across a standard, heavy red brick with 2 massive googly eyes securely glued to the front. The brick was nestled gently inside a tiny, hand-knitted felt blanket to keep it warm. A carefully written note attached to the fabric simply read, "This is Bartholomew. He is a great listener." You really have to admire the absolute mental breakdown required to knit a blanket for construction material. 14. Sifting through the clothing racks can yield some wild results, but finding the official uniform for intergalactic victims is a remarkably rare treat. Someone found a very worn-in vintage denim jacket that featured a highly official-looking embroidered patch on the back. The text on the patch proudly announced, "The International Society of People Who Have Been Abducted by Aliens, official member." Was this a gag gift from the 80s, or is there an actual bowling league for people who have been probed in flying saucers? Whoever donated it clearly decided they were done bragging about their extraterrestrial road trip. 15. Buying outdated kitchen appliances is usually a great way to start a massive electrical fire, but one shopper discovered a truly cursed breakfast item. They purchased a heavy chrome toaster from the 1970s that looked perfectly normal on the outside. But when they brought it home and dropped in 2 slices of plain white bread, they got a terrifying surprise. The internal heating coils were permanently modified to perfectly singe a hyper-realistic, highly detailed portrait of Richard Nixon into every single piece of toast. No matter what setting you chose, you got a crispy, aggressively staring former president with your morning coffee. 16. You spot a shiny, impressive-looking gold trophy sitting proudly on a shelf and naturally assume it belongs to a champion athlete or a brilliant scholar. You pick it up to read the engraved plaque, expecting a tale of greatness. Instead, it proudly declares the winner of an incredibly specific title. For being the world's okayest brother, 1999. The sheer, concentrated passive aggression required to go to a trophy shop, pay cash for custom engraving, and present this to a family member is absolutely staggering. That is not just a joke. That is a physical monument to a lifelong sibling rivalry. 17. Looking at old children's toys is a fantastic way to realize it is an absolute miracle the baby boomer generation even survived to adulthood. In a box of dusty board games, someone discovered a vintage Little Chemist set from the 1950s. It sounds adorable and educational until you read the actual contents list. The manufacturer completely bypassed baking soda volcanoes and included actual physical samples of radioactive uranium ore. Yes, the toy company actively encouraged unsupervised kids to handle radioactive materials in their living rooms. Just a fun afternoon of building a glowing science project and completely destroying your cellular structure. 18. Imagine the sheer thrill of finding a brand new top-of-the-line kitchen blender in its original box for only $5. A shopper thought they hit the appliance jackpot, but when they opened the box at home, there was absolutely no machinery inside. Instead, carefully nestled into the protective styrofoam was a collection of about 20 smooth rocks. Each rock had a tiny name tag taped to it, accompanied by a multi-page handwritten backstory detailing its personal hopes, dreams, and tragic flaws. Someone traded their blender box to house a literal stone civilization, and that is just beautifully, undeniably deranged. 19. The book section is usually just full of outdated encyclopedias and diet manuals. But one person found a laminated, spiral-bound guide that raises some serious red flags. The title printed on the cover was Being a Human, a User's Guide for Beginners. Flipping through the pages revealed highly detailed instructions on totally normal behavior. Chapter 3 covered how to make small talk about the weather, while Chapter 7 gave step-by-step advice on pretending to be busy on your phone to avoid awkward eye contact. Either this was written by a deeply introverted genius, or we have lizard people actively trying to blend in. 20. Sometimes you find a piece of clothing that tells a story so deeply tragic, it belongs in the Smithsonian. A shopper found a faded green t-shirt from a 2003 Johnson family reunion. The front was permanently stained, but the back featured bold, custom-printed letters declaring, "I survived the Great Potato Salad Incident." There was absolutely zero context provided. No explanation of what the incident was, how many people fell ill, or why potato salad was weaponized in the first place. You just know that Aunt Carol brought a warm bowl of mayonnaise to a picnic, and absolute chaos ensued. 21. People love the trendy idea of upcycling old junk into functional home decor, but some individuals need to have their glue guns legally confiscated by the state. Someone found a fully functional table lamp sitting in the furniture section, but the base of the lamp was not made of brass or wood. It was an old, slightly scuffed-up prosthetic leg. To make matters infinitely worse, the leg was still wearing a dirty tube sock and a highly worn-out sneaker. Who in their right mind decides that what their living room really needs is the ambient, romantic glow of an amputated limb? 22. What could possibly be more excruciatingly boring than reading through a stranger's old accounting ledger? Well, how about an incredibly thick ledger that meticulously documents every single French fry the author consumed over a 30-year span? Every entry noted the specific date, the restaurant, a complex crispiness score, and detailed reviews on the accompanying dipping sauces. It was not just a casual food diary, it was a full-blown psychotic potato manifesto. The sheer dedication required to track 3 decades of fried carbohydrates is genuinely frightening. The government needs to hire this person immediately to audit the Pentagon. 23. Thrift store clocks are usually just cheap plastic garbage, but someone found a massive, beautifully carved wooden cuckoo clock that was clearly built purely out of spite. Instead of a cute little bird popping out to chirp a cheerful melody on the hour, the tiny wooden doors violently swung open to reveal a completely silent, tiny carved wooden hand. The hand simply pointed a highly aggressive, accusing finger directly at you for exactly 10 seconds before slowly retreating back into the dark wooden hole. It didn't chime or make a sound. It just silently judged your life choices every 60 minutes. 24. If you think Victorian porcelain dolls are incredibly creepy on their own, wait until you hear about this terrifying little treasure. A buyer brought home a fragile old doll that happened to be clutching a tiny metal locket secured with a microscopic padlock. After painstakingly picking the lock to reveal the secret inside, they did not find a vintage photograph or a romantic lock of hair. They found a single solitary grain of rice. And drawn directly onto that grain of rice was an incredibly detailed, intensely angry little face. That is not a toy. That is a cursed object carrying a microscopic demon. 25. Antique jewelry boxes are undeniably beautiful, but they sometimes hide things better left completely undiscovered. A woman in Texas bought a gorgeous wooden box and accidentally found a secret false bottom hidden underneath the velvet lining. Tucked away securely inside that tiny, dark compartment was a fully mummified human finger, still wearing a gold wedding ring. She naturally called the police, but they could not match it to any open cases or missing persons. So now, this poor woman is the proud owner of a lovely wooden box and an incredibly disturbing, completely unsolved bodily mystery sitting on her dresser. 26. You expect old photo albums to hold precious family memories or beautiful vacation sunsets, but one shopper found an album completely dedicated to absolute petty revenge. It contained over 200 crisp photographs of horribly parked cars, taking up multiple spaces in various grocery store parking lots. Next to every single glossy photo was a neat, handwritten note detailing the exact make, model, and a deeply insulting, highly specific critique of the driver's moral character. Someone literally made it their absolute life's mission to violently document terrible parking jobs, and their incredibly angry legacy ended up priced at $2. 27. Finding a beautiful vintage musical instrument for cheap is an absolute dream, until you realize it possesses a baffling supernatural quirk. A shopper bought a gorgeous old accordion that appeared to be in completely pristine condition. However, it did not have that classic musty attic smell. Instead, this accordion smelled aggressively of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. And the weirdest part? Every single time you squeezed the bellows to play a note, it shot a puff of warm, cookie-scented air directly into your face. No one could explain why it smelled like a bakery, but honestly, that is a fantastic undocumented feature. 28. Thrift store art is notoriously terrible, but sometimes you find a painting that feels like a deeply personal attack on your sanity. Someone uncovered an oil painting depicting a dark, smoky room with 4 figures sitting around a table. It looked like a classic poker scene, except all 4 players were terrifyingly detailed, highly realistic clowns. And they were not playing poker. They were engaged in a deadly serious, high-stakes game of Monopoly. The artist perfectly captured the sheer agony on the face of a clown who just landed on a hotel-covered boardwalk. Hang that in a museum immediately. 29. Finding a magic wand in a cardboard box of donated children's toys is completely normal. Finding one with a deeply concerning disclaimer is an entirely different story. The wand itself looked suspiciously like a random tree branch, heavily coated in cheap craft glitter. But taped firmly to the handle was a handwritten price tag that read, "Barely used, only a few small spells. Previous owner was a goblin. Works fine." You have to respect the absolute retail hustle of trying to upcharge a sparkly piece of wood by claiming it was previously utilized by a mythical creature. 5 stars for the aggressive marketing. 30. Discovering an urn filled with human ashes sitting on a discount store shelf is jarring enough on its own. Discovering one with a highly specific performance review attached to it is just completely wild. The brass urn had a yellow, sticky note slapped right on the front. The handwritten message said, "This is Bob. He hated this urn. Please find him a better home. P.S. He liked classic rock and absolutely hated coconut." Buying that urn means you are not just getting cheap home decor. You are directly adopting the spirit of a very picky dead guy who will absolutely judge your music taste. 31. The musical instrument section is usually just full of broken acoustic guitars, but someone found a device that was built purely out of raging spite. It looked like a horrifying physical mutation between a Scottish bagpipe and a clarinet. A typed note taped to the side proudly explained that this was a custom-made grief flute. It was specifically designed to be played at the funerals of people you secretly despised. The creator noted that the sound it produced was both mildly annoying and vaguely disappointing. Weaponizing terrible music against the deceased is a level of petty I can only aspire to achieve. 32. You expect to find some heavily scratched bowling ball sitting in the dusty sporting goods section of a secondhand shop. But one particular ball came with a deeply concerning, totally permanent custom upgrade. A shopper bought a swirly purple bowling ball for $5, only to realize the previous owner had permanently embedded a fully intact adult human molar deep inside the thumb hole. Was it some bizarre lucky charm to guarantee a strike? Was it a physical threat to the local bowling league? Either way, you are literally aggressively shaking hands with someone's extracted dental work every single time you hit the lanes. 33. We have all seen our fair share of incredibly weird patriotic statues, but this specific find deserves a permanent spot in the National Archives. It was a heavy, 3-foot-tall replica of the Statue of Liberty. However, instead of proudly hoisting the iconic torch of freedom into the sky, Lady Liberty was aggressively gripping a massive golden corn dog. Yes, a deep-fried sausage on a stick, held high for all the world to admire. I can think of absolutely nothing that represents the true, unadulterated American dream better than a giant bronze monument to battered, deep-fried meat. 34. You never really know what kind of bizarre collections people will abandon. Someone bought a heavy binder that was meticulously organized with clear plastic sleeves. Inside were hundreds of those bright red remove-before-flight tags that hang off commercial airplanes. This was clearly not the collection of a licensed pilot. The scribbled notes in the margins casually suggested that every single tag was simply found. How on earth does a regular civilian casually find hundreds of crucial aviation safety tags without ending up in a federal prison or sitting permanently on a government no-fly list? 35. It was just a single shoe sitting incredibly sadly by itself on a metal shelf. But it was not a dirty gym sneaker. It was an impossibly glamorous Christian Louboutin high heel, completely encrusted in highly expensive Swarovski crystals. The staff searched the entire store, but the matching shoe was completely gone. It felt like the perfect setup for a modern, highly expensive Cinderella story. Except in this specific version, the princess probably had an incredibly wild night out, lost her $1,000 footwear in a gutter, and had a fiercely confusing one-legged walk of shame back to her apartment. 36. Snow globes are usually filled with tiny winter wonderlands and festive holiday scenes, but a shopper found one that was profoundly, aggressively depressing. Inside the heavy glass dome, there was absolutely no snow, no reindeer, and no jolly snowman. It was a highly detailed miniature replica of a completely empty, highly fluorescent office cubicle with a single tiny coffee mug knocked over on a gray desk. When you shook the glass, instead of glittery white snow, tiny printed miniature eviction notices violently swirled around the sad little cubicle. It was the absolute, undeniable opposite of traditional holiday cheer. 37. Sometimes you stumble across an object that completely proves humanity has way too much free time on its hands. A shopper found a beautifully crafted, incredibly detailed ship completely built inside a glass bottle. But it was not your standard pirate galleon or a historical naval warship. It was a perfect, tiny replica of the Titanic, frozen at the exact moment it slammed into the iceberg. The artist even took the time to glue microscopic, terrified little figures falling over the railings into the fake glass water. It is undeniably a masterpiece of engineering, but it is also deeply, profoundly psychotic. 38. A shopper purchased an old, heavy leather folder thinking it would be absolutely perfect for holding their boring tax documents. Inside, they found a completely authentic, legally binding last will and testament from a very wealthy individual. The document listed a multi-million-dollar estate, including a massive mansion, a fleet of vintage sports cars, and a heavy stock portfolio. The incredible punchline? Every single asset was being legally left to a large indoor ficus tree named Philip. The will even included 20 pages of strict legal instructions for the plant's weekly watering and pruning schedule. Peak eccentric billionaire behavior right there. 39. In a plastic bin full of tangled power cords and useless 90s tech, someone unearthed a device that boldly promised to translate your cat's meows into plain English. It featured a little plastic collar microphone and a bulky speaker unit that would finally reveal your feline's deepest, most profound thoughts. Naturally, the machine only had about 3 pre-recorded phrases, meaning no matter what your cat actually sounded like, the machine just aggressively shouted, "I am hungry," or "Leave me alone." Honestly, even if the technology was totally fake, it was still a 100% historically accurate representation of living with a cat. 40. Thrift stores are absolute goldmines for horrifying DIY home improvement projects that should have never seen the light of day. Someone discovered a standard, heavy-duty toilet seat made entirely out of crystal-clear resin. The massive problem? Suspended permanently inside that perfectly clear plastic were literally thousands of real, dead yellow jacket wasps. Who in their right mind actively decides they want to spend their most vulnerable bathroom moments hovering directly over a terrifying, frozen swarm of stinging insects? The sheer aggressive energy required to pour that specific resin mold is a massive red flag for local law enforcement. 41. Finding a set of traditional wooden Russian nesting dolls is a totally classic thrifting experience. But one shopper brought home a lovely painted set that quickly escalated into an absolute psychological thriller on their living room coffee table. You open the first smiling grandma, and the next one inside looks slightly annoyed. By the third doll, she is visibly furious with clenched teeth. The final, smallest doll at the very center was not even a person anymore. It was just a tiny, perfectly painted wooden hand aggressively giving you the middle finger. I have never felt so personally insulted by a piece of cheap Eastern European folk art. 42. In a dusty basket full of expired pet supplies sat a brand new, factory-sealed product straight out of the late 1990s. The box proudly advertised cat goggles. They were essentially tiny, brightly colored plastic sunglasses strapped to an elastic band, designed specifically to protect your feline's eyes from harmful solar glare. You really have to admire the absolute unhinged delusion of the inventor who genuinely believed they could convince a domestic house cat to wear sunglasses for more than 3 seconds without completely shredding their owner's arms into bloody ribbons. 43. Antique mirrors are undeniably beautiful, but they always carry a slight risk of being entirely cursed by a Victorian ghost. A shopper bought a heavy, ornate mirror, but quickly realized it had a permanent, terrifying defect. No matter how many times they scrubbed it with heavy glass cleaner, a faint, ghostly handprint remained clearly visible. It was not a smudge on the outside. The handprint appeared to be burned deep inside the glass itself. To make things completely unbearable, if you touched the exact spot where the handprint rested, the glass was inexplicably freezing cold. Nope, put it straight into the garbage. 44. It looked like a sweet, completely innocent Victorian-style portrait of a young girl in a beautiful wooden frame. A completely standard, slightly boring find for a thrift store. But the shopper quickly realized it was a highly advanced lenticular print. As you walked past the painting, the little girl's eyes did not just playfully follow you around the room. Her sweet, innocent smile slowly warped and stretched into a horrifying, gigantic, toothy grin. It is not just a quirky piece of antique art. It is a physical jump scare waiting to give your house guests a massive heart attack on their way to the bathroom. 45. Someone bought a massive, incredibly heavy wooden coffee table with a thick glass top, thinking it was just a solid piece of practical furniture. It was not until they got it home and wiped down the glass that they realized what was lurking underneath. The entire inside of the table was a massive, incredibly detailed diorama of a suburban neighborhood. We are talking tiny houses with individual shingles, little parked cars, and microscopic people having a barbecue in their fake backyards. Who spends hundreds of hours building an entire miniature society inside a living room table and then just gives it away for 20 bucks? 46. Someone uncovered what looked like a vintage board game box from the 1980s, but it was absolutely not a family-friendly classic. The cardboard cover proudly announced a deeply cynical game called Divorce Settlement: The Home Edition. When the buyer opened the box, the board was shaped exactly like a fluorescent legal courtroom, and the metal player tokens were tiny flat-screen televisions, sports cars, and crying children. The play cards included incredibly brutal financial penalties like your ex-spouse found your hidden offshore bank account, lose 2 turns, and pay heavy alimony. It is a genuine miracle this game legally existed. 47. The 1960s were an incredibly dark time for American cuisine, and one donated cookbook stands as permanent, horrifying proof of those culinary crimes. This heavy hardcover was not about baking fresh bread or grilling steaks. It was completely dedicated to aggressive recipes utilizing flavored gelatin. And not for sweet desserts. We are talking absolute dinner table atrocities like the ham and banana hollandaise mold and the deeply offensive Jell-O tuna salad loaf. It is less of a functional family cookbook and more of a historical document showcasing the terrifying psychological state of housewives during the Cold War. 48. You can find some truly bizarre personal histories discarded in cheap cardboard boxes. One person bought a dusty old shoebox, and inside were dozens of handwritten, unopened letters addressed directly to Santa Claus, all dated from the 1960s. The deeply depressing twist? Every single letter was written by a full-grown adult. Nobody was asking for a toy train or a shiny new bicycle. They were begging a fictional fat man for things like winning lottery numbers, a husband who actually bathes, or the sheer willpower not to rob a bank. Reading them is an absolute emotional roller coaster of mid-century desperation. 49. Tucked away safely in a plastic bin full of rusty forks and dull kitchen knives, a shopper found what looked like a set of fancy, highly polished stainless steel ice picks. They bought them for making expensive cocktails, but a little bit of quick internet research revealed a horrifying reality. Those were not for chipping ice in a highball glass. They had accidentally purchased a complete vintage medical kit specifically designed for performing transorbital lobotomies. Just a fun little piece of surgical nightmare fuel, accidentally mixed in with the discount rubber spatulas and plastic measuring cups. 50. Deep inside a massive pile of discarded picture frames, someone uncovered a glorious testament to a true American champion. It was a beautifully framed, official-looking certificate from a highly obscure organization. It awarded a man simply named Gerald the 1982 world record for loudest sneeze, unassisted. It even had the official decibel level proudly printed at the bottom, proving that Gerald's violent nasal explosions were genuinely louder than a commercial riding lawnmower. Somewhere out there, an absolute legend walks among us, and his greatest physical achievement ended up priced at $3 in a Goodwill. Let's settle this. Which of these items was the absolute biggest red flag? Because honestly, whoever made that dead wasp toilet seat needs to be on a federal watch list immediately. Drop your top pick in the comments so I know I am not the only one disturbed. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next pile of chaos.